Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today for another edition of the IMPLAN webinar series. I currently have the top of the hour, so 1 p.m. Eastern time on my end, and I can see that folks are still joining, so I'll give it another minute or two before we jump into the presentation. Thanks. All right, everybody. So welcome again to the November edition of the IMPLAN webinar series, Evolving Economy, Changes in the Economy Reflected in the 2022 IMPLAN Data. I will also add that this data is now live in IMPLAN's application. Each year, IMPLAN's economists work diligently to compile the latest data from a wide range of sources, filling gaps within this raw data, balance the data across various geographic levels, and more, which empowers users to make their analyses more accurate and timely. In this presentation, we will highlight the new data sets incorporated into the 2022 core IMPLAN data, and we'll also explore some of the changes to the US economy that are revealed by the new annual data set. For those of you who do not know, I am Michael Nealy. I am an education services specialist working on the education services team here at IMPLAN, and joining me here today to lead us through the bulk of the material from the IMPLAN data team is Dr. Jenny Thorvaldsen, IMPLAN's chief economist and data officer. So if this is your first time joining IMPLAN for one of our webinars, know that we like to keep our webinars interactive by allowing attendees to post questions live to our presenters. However, today we do have quite a full slate, and we will likely take close to that full time that we've allotted of about 60 minutes. So we do ask that if you have questions related to today's topic, to please utilize the question box and go to webinar, and we will do our best to monitor the question box throughout the presentation. If you think you might want to ask a question, just make sure that you have your control panel open by hitting that orange arrow on the upper left-hand portion of the pop-out window. At the conclusion of this presentation, if we've not had a chance to answer your question within the time frame that we've allotted, we will personally follow up with everyone to provide a response. So don't worry if we don't have quite enough time to get to your question today, you will get an answer from a member of our team. And with that, I will pass the mic off to Jenny. Jenny, it's all yours.
Thanks, Michael, and welcome everyone. Thanks for being here. We're so glad you're here, and we hope that this webinar is useful for you. And I'm going to start by talking a bit briefly about some of the important features of our core data set and our main data sources and the timing of those data sources, and some of the new ones that came out this year that we've incorporated into this 2022 IMPLAN data. And after going through that, I'll take a look at some of the changes that we see that are reflected in the new data relative to 2021 and previous years. And then I'll hand it back over to Michael, who will dive in a little bit deeper by looking into our time series data that are available to all subscribers in the data library portion of our application. All right, so let's go ahead and talk a little bit about our core data and data source timing. So just as a reminder, for those of you who already know this, or some of you who may not, all of IMPLAN's raw data sources that we use are publicly available data sources. So anyone could go get the same starting raw data that we use. And how we add value, we add a lot of value to those data in several ways. And one is just collecting it from all these various different sources. And then, of course, and reconciling them all. But of course, we also provide estimates for suppressed values. So for privacy purposes, the government in many of their data sources they sort of poke holes in the data set in a way, and they have non-disclosed values or suppressed values where they might tell you that a certain industry exists in a certain region, but they will not tell you how many employees work there or how much money they make, those employees earn, or how much output there is, and things like that. And so we fill in those gaps, and over, using our methods that we've honed over the last 30 years, we provide estimates for those missing values. We add geographic detail. Of course, in IMPLAN models, all of our models have the same data elements. So all the zip code models and county models will have all the same data elements that the state models have and that the national model has. But the smaller geographic levels have fewer raw data sources. And so we have methods to take data tables that are at the national level only, or maybe at the state level only, and distribute those values out to the counties in that state and the zip codes in each county, and so forth. Similarly, within industry detail. So most of the data sources we have less sector detail than we have in IMPLAN. And so we need to give additional industry detail by taking those more aggregate industries and bringing their data out into more detailed industries using other data sources that do have the necessary industry detail. We provide estimates for values for which there are no raw data, and the main example of this would be our domestic trade flow data. So the trade of goods and services between geographies within the US. And for that, we use a gravity model. We have a YouTube video on that and a lengthy paper that describes that method. We also adjust for some undercoverage. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics Census of Employment and Wages is one of our most important and favorite data sets. It actually is one of those that has more sector detail than IMPLAN. However, it does undercover some sectors. For a couple examples, higher education industry, it does not include student employees. The farm industries, it doesn't include most employees of small farms. Doesn't include some elected officials and things like that. So we have adjustment procedures that we use to account for that undercoverage and fix that. And then, of course, at the end, we control everything to the annual US NIPA values, National Income and Product Accounts values from the BEA, and we enforce geographic balancing. So that's a lot of the value we add to the data itself before, of course, including it with the software to be able to run impacts. Okay, now most of our data sources do come out annually, but there are some that are only released periodically. So I'm going to talk about those a little bit and start by talking about some of the periodic ones that came out this year that we were able to incorporate into our 2022 data. So the decennial census, of course, as the name would suggest, only comes out every 10 years. Luckily, we don't use a ton of data from the decennial census, but we do use some components, and some of them were released this year, and we were able to incorporate them. So we're really excited about that. The zip code tabulation area land areas, we had new data for those come out this year, and we were able to incorporate them into the 2022 IMPLAN data. We also got the bridge between zip code tabulation areas and counties, and that's really important to be able to parse out the county level data to zip codes. So We got a new relationship file there, which was great. And additionally, similarly, we got the relationship file between counties and MSAs. And so that was incorporated this year. Another thing we got this year was the American Community Survey's Commuter flows, which is released every 5 years. And so this describes in which county an employee works and in which county that employee lives. And so this is really important for getting accurate induced effects in IMPLAN, because in IMPLAN we do not assume that all workers in a region live in that region and spend their money in that region. We actually take into account this commuting, which is really important for getting accurate induced effects. And then of course, this is part of multi-regional input-output analysis, if that's something that you are doing. So to be able to show induced effects in a neighboring region or some other linked region. So that was great. Sorry, didn't do that. Okay, a couple other periodically released raw data sources that didn't come out this year, but that are coming out next year, and just wanted to give you a quick preview of that. The biggest and most important of this is the benchmark IO tables from the BEA, which are released every 5 years. And this is a really huge deal because this is where we get the industry spending patterns, or also known as industry production functions. So all the inputs that each industry buys and all of that, and as well as some other components like the foreign trade of services, which we don't have another source for, commodity margins, which we don't have another source for. We get some government spending patterns, investment spending patterns, things like that. So the BEA benchmark IO tables give us a wealth of information and also really influence the sectoring scheme, or all the industries that we have in our IMPLAN data. So that will be coming out. We're keeping an eye out for it daily. It should come out anytime now, and it will be incorporated into our 2023 data, and we'll have a whole separate webinar just on the benchmark. So keep your eyes out for that. And then the Census of Agriculture also comes out every 5 years, and it's expected to come out in the next couple of months, and we will incorporate that into our 2023 IMPLAN data as well. And that's really important for getting county level farm output. Okay, and as I mentioned previously, the rest of our data sources do come out annually. So almost all industry data, other than those spending patterns, we get annual data on industry level output and all the components of value added for industries and employment for industries. And most of our commodity data, we get raw data for it fresh every year, including inventory, foreign imports and exports of shippable goods, so not services, but of goods. We get that fresh every year, and household spending patterns comes out fresh every year, which is great. And most of our interinstitutional transfers, like taxes and things like that. And just so you know, even though some of our data sources only come out periodically, all IMPLAN values are updated annually. Every single value, even if they start from a raw data value that is only, is several years old, they all get updated annually because of all of this geographical balancing we do and the controlling to NIPA tables and things like that. So as I already mentioned, we control everything to the annual NIPA control totals. And an example of this would be the foreign trade of services. I mentioned that we get the detail on that from that BEA benchmark table that only comes out every 5 years. And it gives you all the detailed services and how much of those we export to foreign places or import from foreign places. But every year, we get a US NIPA control total value for the total imports and exports of services. So the NIPA table won't tell the whole list of all the services and the different values for each individual service, but it gives us a total for foreign imports and exports of services. And so we take those 5-year-old numbers and update them so that they sum up to this new control total. So that's just one example. Similarly, I mentioned those 5-year commuter flows. We got those new this year, but and those show the county-to-county partners of where an employee lives and works. But every year, the BEA gives us a residence adjustment number for each county, which shows the gross commuter flows. So it doesn't show the partner counties in which those in commuters live, but it does show us the amount of commuting in or out of a county. And so we can control the county-county pair data to those gross commuter flows that we have annually. So that's an example of that. The industry input, intermediate input values, II is how we shorthand for that. I mentioned that those come every 5 years from the benchmark, but those are updated annually in a couple of ways. So first of all, if you remember, industry output is the sum of its total intermediate inputs plus value added. Well, we get fresh values every year for industry output and industry value added. So we know that total industry inputs has to be the difference between the output and the value added. So we boost all of the intermediate input purchases for each industry up or down based on the new information we get for that industry on output or value added. So that's sort of a proportional boosting or shrinking of each intermediate input. And that's a proportional one. So it doesn't change the ratio between each input. But in the second way in which we update these, it actually does change the proportions between the inputs purchased by each industry. And that's because we get annual values for commodity demand from households, government, inventory, exports, and commodity supply. Supply by industries, supply by institutions, which we call institutional sales, inventory, and imports of those goods. And everything has to be balanced in IMPLAN. All demands have to be satisfied from somewhere, and all supplies have to go somewhere. And so through this big balancing RAS method, we get updated values for that in that way as well. Okay. Sorry. Okay, and then just a couple last changes this year that I want to mention is one thing to note is that BLS CEW data that I mentioned before, it was released in the new 2022 NAICS code scheme this year. And that new NAICS code scheme has industries that have been given new codes or been consolidated or have been expanded. One example is automobile manufacturing and light truck and utility manufacturing. They've been combined into a single industry this year, or in this new NAICS scheme. And so that presented some challenges for IMPLAN because currently we have those as separate industries. But in future years, they will probably be combined as that single industry in IMPLAN since they've been combined into a single industry here in NAICS. But there are some new industries as well. I think composting was one of those. So anyway, all the details can be found on the NAICS website from the Census Bureau. This doesn't affect most IMPLAN users other than those who really pay attention to our CEW data and use those data because they have such industry detail, and those are found in the data library section of IMPLAN. So it was just to let you know that they're going to be in a different NAICS scheme this year if you do use those. And then we did make one small improvement to our methodology. We found a new data source for county-specific average household size, which is just helpful because we were projecting state average household size and having a methodology like that for counties, and now we just have a raw data source for them. So that's helpful. Okay, now let's, after laying that groundwork, let's have a look at some of the data. So let's see what's going on in the US. Well, since we got those new commuter flow raw data this year, I wanted to take a look at commuting, and especially, post pandemic and all the remote work and things like that. I wanted to see if commuting had actually dropped in the US. And in fact, it did, but very, 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 very slightly. And it's a couple of reasons why it probably didn't drop as much as some of us might have expected is that ACS survey goes for the past 5 years. And so it's not just a single year. So even though it includes 2020, the pandemic year when a lot of folks were working from home, it includes years prior to that as well. Another factor to keep in mind is that the survey asks users, respondents, where their primary place of work is. So if they're working hybrid, but they're working more in the office than they are in the home, then they are going to be included as a commuter. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. The highest in commuting rate was for Fairfax County, Virginia. Very high commuting rate, but that makes sense intuitively, as that is a suburb of Washington, D.C. And then the lowest in commuting rate was for Honolulu County, Hawaii, which is also intuitive. Not a lot of commuting going in and out of an island in the middle of the Pacific. And just a note that the raw data we get are actually worker flows, but we convert them to flows of employee compensation net of payroll taxes. Because of course, what matters for economic impacts is to see where the money is flowing and where it gets spent. And we only flow out the employee compensation net of payroll taxes because payroll taxes are paid at the place of employment. Okay, GDP, US GDP continued to rise by double digits, 10.4% between 2021 and 2022, compared to 11.6% between 2020 and 2021. So still growing at a good clip there. All states experienced an increase in GDP, just like a year ago when we did this webinar. And the largest percentage increases were experienced in Texas, New Mexico, Wyoming, Alaska, and Idaho. And just a quick note that Wyoming and Idaho were on the top 5 list last year as well. So it's been a couple of years in a row that Wyoming and Idaho have showed up in the top 5 in states in terms of percent GDP change. So they continue to grow. And just to show you visually across the US, again, all of them grew. So even though California looks white there, it still had healthy GDP growth between 2021 and 2022. And just to give you a little visual here, with the darker green being the states that had experienced the highest percentage change in GDP. All right, turning to taxes and subsidies. This one we've been keeping an eye on because of the pandemic and the big changes we saw there. So some of you may already know this, but TOPI, which is taxes on production and imports net of subsidies, it's a part of value added. And the important part here is that it's net of subsidies, which means that if an industry received more in subsidies than it paid in taxes in a given year, it will have negative TOPI. And this happens for a handful of industries every year. So some of the ones that commonly pop up would be state and local government, passenger transit. That's one. Another, farm sectors often show up here with negative TOPIs. There's always a handful. And as you can see here, in 2019, we had a dozen industries that at the US level had negative TOPI. But looking when we went to 2020, we had 231 industries with negative TOPI. That's almost half the sectors in IMPLAN. And a lot of that was due, well, it was all due to all the PPP loans and things like that industries were getting, because even though those were technically loans, the BEA treated them as subsidies because they were not expecting to have those repaid. And so that was kind of, it threw off the IMPLAN analyses a little bit. It would sometimes yield negative tax impacts and some just weirdness. And so we were really happy last year to see that the number of industries with negative TOPI was coming back down, fell by about half to 119. And we're thrilled this year that it looks like we're back to a normal, so to speak, with just 15 industries with negative TOPI. So that was cool. Looking at, let's see, I'm not advancing here. Household income and spending. Real household spending continued to rise at a double-digit pace. So by real, I mean I have adjusted for inflation here when calculating these percentage changes. And what I thought was so fascinating is that if you look at these percentage changes in household spending, they almost perfectly match the percentage changes in GDP over the last sets of years, and just really goes to bolster the statement that U.S. household spending, consumer spending, is really what drives the U.S. economy, and this certainly reflects it here. All right. Household demand increased, more than doubled for 4 commodities between 2021 and 2022. And I just thought it was interesting to point these out because they all have to do with travel and entertainment. So probably no big surprise to anyone. We've been hearing a lot about how we're getting out there and doing our traveling and revenge traveling and going to concerts and all of those things. So it is reflected here in the IMPLAN data. And by the way, I just want to point out most of the things I'm looking at here are US level, but of course we do have state-specific household spending patterns. So if you were interested in a particular state, you'd want to go in and look at it, because this will vary by state, of course. And you could see that in data library or in the region details of whatever subscription you have. All right. I wanted to look at it by household income group. And this time around, every single household income group did experience a change, an increase in household spending per household. And this differs from last year when we did this webinar looking at 2020 to 2021. The highest income household income groups, they actually saw a decrease in their spending. So now all household income groups are participating in this increase. But if I compare 2019 to 2022, you will see here that the highest household income group is still below its 2019 spending per household. So it hasn't fully recovered its level of spending. Okay, turning to employment, I wanted to look at the largest percent change in employment from last year to this year, and it happened to occur in solar electricity generation with an increase of 63%, which I thought was pretty interesting. So just looking at this industry a little bit more, and just to give a little more context, here I wanted to just show the states with the most employment in this sector. So this isn't percentage change anymore. I'm just looking at 2022 employment. So the top employer for this particular industry is California, followed by Texas. And then here you can kind of see the other states that have a little bit darker green there. And then diving in just a little bit more into the states, here are the top 10 states in terms of 2022 employment in solar power generation. So I have it sorted by the 2022 employment, but added the column here about to look at the percentage change. So just to kind of interesting to look at some of the up and coming states in terms of solar power generation. Thought that was kind of interesting. And then slicing the data just a little bit differently, I wanted to look at all of the power generation sectors. We have a handful in IMPLAN, and see how solar compared to the other types. And so here in this table, I'm showing all of our electric power generation industries in IMPLAN and their percentage change in employment and they all increased except for fossil fuel, which experienced a small decrease in employment over the year. Just thought that was kind of interesting. And that was all I had prepared for this. And now I'm going to hand it back over to Michael, who's going to dive in a little bit deeper by going into data library and having a look at some of our time series data.
Thank you very much for that insightful conversation there, Jenny, and all of the information you were able to provide for us. And like she said, I'm now going to take a look at the IMPLAN time series data, specifically utilizing IMPLAN's data library tool to do that and get different types of visualizations for a lot of the insights that Jenny just shared with us. So a couple of quick notes about the IMPLAN time series data. Currently, we have 2001 all the way to the current IMPLAN data year, or 2022. This is re-estimated every 5 years for revised raw data, non-lagged raw data, updated for current best practices, and also updated for consistent industry sets and institution sets, excuse me. Speaking a little bit more generally about data library, again, all IMPLAN data from 2001 to 2022 currently is available within data library. So access to data library, remember, includes all of these data years for all US regions, and so states and counties across the entire nation, again, all in a single subscription. Data library includes all data that are in the IMPLAN modeling side of the application, so the IO tool for running economic impact analysis, but it also has a couple of data sets that are unique to only data library. So one of those is our domestic trade flow data, so we can see how commodities are flowing between regions, so destination regions and origin regions, and then the CEW data. So this gives us wage and salary, employment, and income at that 6-digit NAICS level as well. And again, those two items are not available in the region details side of the application. Data library has various built-in dashboards that are extremely simple to use. All it requires you to do is, of course, select the appropriate dashboard based on the data set that you are particularly interested in. For example, the CEW data, and just really change around some filters to display your desired data points. However, you also have the ability to build out your own data tables as well as build your own custom dashboards for whichever research or use case is pertinent to you as a user. From data library, we can gain valuable insights by comparing data across years, industries, regions, etc. Again, an overwhelming majority of these data points are available within the region detail side of the application, but data library adds value because whenever we're talking about the region details, we're talking about a single region and a single data year, so a particular point in time. So it can become quite tedious if your use case requires you to compare certain data points across regions or across industries or time, because it would require you to have multiple tabs open or download multiple Excel files, etc. Whereas in data library, again, you can build your own custom data tables to make these types of comparisons. Additionally, with data library, we have various different visualization options that I'm going to demonstrate here in just a little while to add some more color to some of the points that Jenny made during her portion, such as downloadable data tables. Again, all of that data is fully exportable into Excel or a CSV file format. You can also create more detailed visualizations such as bar charts, trend lines, heat maps, pie charts, etc. So with that, before we get into our Q&A, I'm going to go ahead and jump into IMPLAN here. And as you can see, we get this brand new spiffy notification letting us know that IMPLAN's 2022 data is now available. If you want to find it for the region details side of the application to use for your economic impact analysis, you could navigate to the region screen. And from this data year dropdown on the region screen, you could come all the way down and select 2022 and use all of these regions for your analysis that you have access to in your subscription. However, if we come back to the IMPLAN dashboard by hitting that IMPLAN logo in the top left-hand corner, we head to Data Library by either selecting the Data Library tile from our main screen or by hitting the Data Library icon from our vertical navigation. Of course, this will open up Data Library. And like I said, I've created a few different looks, quote unquote, which are form of a data query that I created myself from various different data explorers. So like I said earlier, IMPLAN has various different dashboards that are available, such as competency by occupation details, so those core competencies, deflator data, of course, industry data is one of the more popular topics, and then those data sets that are specific to data libraries, such as the employment and wages by NAICS with the imputed CEW data and that trade flow data that cannot be found in the region details. So Jenny spoke a moment ago about some demand changes by our household institutions by commodities across years. So I created a look out of a data query here to highlight some of those household demand changes by commodity from our 2021 IMPLAN annual data to the 2022 IMPLAN annual data. So I can open that real quick. And again, these are going to be changes in final demand by all of the household institutions in IMPLAN. So of course, we can see here the largest dollar value change is going to be for those imputed rental services of owner-occupied dwellings, but then also we can see that households demanded quite a bit more of hospital services, so commodity 3490, but they also started eating out quite a bit more. So that is commodity 3509, so they're spending quite a bit more of their hard-earned dollars out at those full-service restaurants. Like Jenny talked about, air transportation services also saw quite a large jump in final demand. People are getting it back vacation-wise from those pandemic years where travel was not as frequent. Households also spend quite a bit more on things like refined petroleum products, some more offices of physicians. And then an interesting one here that I thought would be fun to point out is these non-store retail services. So this would be things people ordering goods from retailers that don't have brick and mortar locations, so online retailers such as Amazon. We also see another food and beverage industry jumping a lot for their services, so household demand for all other food and drinking places jumped quite a bit, as well as for hotels and motels. So again, similar to these air transportation final demand jumps, we're seeing a lot of people spending more dollars at hotels and motels, likely on vacation or traveling for work. So IMPLAN allows us to display these by setting up a data query and choosing a bar chart as our visualization. Jenny also spoke in pretty explicit detail about those electricity generation sectors. So what we can do is look at some electricity generation industries employment growth across the last few years from our 2019 IMPLAN data all the way to the most current 2022 IMPLAN data. And I've created a column chart that visualizes this. So this first column here would be the growth rate from 2019 to 2020. The second darker blue column is from 2020 to 2021, and then this orangish red color, excuse me, column is from 2021 to 2022. And like Jenny told us, we're seeing quite a large jump of about 63 or so % in that electricity power generation solar. So solar electricity power generation, or industry 42 and IMPLAN had above and beyond the largest growth rate for these electricity producing sectors from 2021 to 2022, and that has been slowly increasing all the way from 2019. Jenny also told us that Industry 40, which is fossil fuel electricity power generation, is the only electricity generating sector that saw an actual reduction in employment from 2021 to 2022, and that is displayed here as well, with about a minus 1.71% growth rate in total employment. And again, when we compare that to all other industries, that is the only electricity generation sector that did see a decline in growth, and that has been slowly declining since 2019 as well. However, we can add some context to that, of course, because these are just growth rates, not necessarily absolute values. So I also built out a pie chart here for the distribution of electricity generation sectors employment in 2022, so we can get a better idea of how these values compare to one another in a single data year. So naturally here we can still see that although fossil fuels total employment, electricity power generation for fossil fuel, that is total employment, dropped all the way from 2019 to 2022, it still takes up over half of the total employment when compared to all of the other electricity power generating industries. So it's about 51.58%, again, even though it saw a decrease from one year to the next. Our second largest sector here as far as the total employment was for electric power generation nuclear, followed by that big grower that we saw from 21 to 22, of course, for electricity power generation solar, and then those associated other industries with smaller growth rates. So for wind, we saw that in 2022, it takes up about 5.69% of the total employment across all of these industries, all the way down to the smallest portion, which is for biomass electric power generation. And again, in 2022, for total employment. All right, last but certainly not least here, Jenny also noted, and this is very important to a lot of IMPLAN's users, especially those who are interested in tax results, is the negative TOPI, or those taxes on production and imports net of subsidy values by industry. Starting with the 2020 data, with the influx of the subsidies that various industries and regions received due to the global pandemic at the time, we started to see a pretty sharp increase in the number of industries that actually had negative TOPI values. And if you're familiar with working in IMPLAN, you likely know that those negative TOPI values can kind of throw your tax results whenever setting up an economic impact analysis, can throw those tax results out of whack. So the last thing I built here is to show the TOPI values by industry from 2019 to 2022, and we can see that the national economy is going more so back towards those pre-pandemic values when thinking about this taxes on production and imports value. Because remember, this TOPI data point is going to be a huge driver of the tax results that you see whenever running an impact in one of these industries. So if we sort our table on 2019, again, I've got these broken out as the IMPLAN data years as columns, and then individual rows for each of the IMPLAN 546 default industries. So if we sort this on ascending values, we can see that in 2019, there were only 12 IMPLAN industries that had a total net negative TOPI value at the US level. When we got into 2020, these things started to get a little bit weird because, again, we saw that mass influx of subsidies flowing to these industries at the national level. And we can see here that in 2020, we went from 12 industries with a total net negative TOPI value at the US level to over 200 industries that had a negative TOPI value, 231 to be exact. So that's quite a bit of the US economy that, again, if you were ever working with the US totals, and again, a lot of places regionally, you're going to see some wonky tax results as a result of this nuance. So in 2021, we started to get a little bit more towards a new normal value for these taxes on production and imports. However, there's still quite a few industries who had these negative TOPI values. So if we scroll down here, we went from 231 industries with negative TOPI values down to 119, but that's still a sizable portion of the 546 industries that are currently available. So this is a very frequently talked about and asked about topic. Why are my taxes the way they are? In a lot of cases, these negative TOPI values were the driving cause there. However, as Jenny told us, with starting with this 2022 data, we're starting to see a lot less industries that will be affected in such a fashion. So we go from 119 industries in 2021 all the way down to only 15 industries in the 2022 data set that have negative TOPI values. So again, whenever you're utilizing this 2022 data set for any of your economic impact analyses, you will start to see some tax results that make a little bit more sense. All right, so with that, I'll jump back into our slides here. So our last session covering some Q&A. I know we had quite a bit of questions that I've rolled in here. We do want to remind you all here that we do offer monthly webinars and welcome your ideas for future sessions because we always want to make sure that we're covering topics that are pertinent to our users. So with that being said, again, we welcome all recommendations. So if you have any ideas on something you'd like to see us cover in a future IMPLAN webinar, be sure to email us at support@implan.com with your topic ideas. If this is not quite the introduction you were looking for to IMPLAN as a whole, this might be your first time interacting with us here at IMPLAN, and you'd like to get a demonstration to go a little bit more in depth with the IMPLAN application, you can schedule a live personalized demo by visiting implan.com/demo or emailing our sales team at sales@implan.com. On these demos, our team can show you all of the data inside of the application, so a more thorough walkthrough, as well as run through an analysis that may be specific to your interest and show you all of the results that IMPLAN generates whenever setting up an economic impact analysis. Again, if you'd like to schedule a demo, visit implan.com/demo or email our sales team at sales@implan.com. Also remember that the new Look IMPLAN support site is a fantastic resource for additional information on all things related to IMPLAN Cloud, whether it be the 2022 annual data set. We do have some release notes available on our website currently, as well as the recording of today's presentation, which will be posted shortly after we conclude for today. Under Learning Center, webinars, you will find the recording of today's presentation. All right, lastly, you can always email our customer success team at support@implan.com if you have a specific question, again, related to anything we cover today or a project that you are setting up by emailing support@implan.com. Additionally, you also have the option to post a question or discussion topic in the community forum located on support.implan.com. With this link here, /HC/EN-US/community/topics. All right, so with that,
Michael, I can take one of the questions if
sure,
you don't
Jenny,
mind.
go ahead.
Okay, so I'm seeing one question that was typed in that says, can you please explain the importance of normalizing your CEW, imputed CEW numbers to the NIPA estimates? So just a couple comments on that. Our CEW data, that's where we provide estimates for all the non-disclosed values, those data and those data held separately are held separately in data library, and you can go look at those. Those at that stage have not been controlled to the NIPA control totals. So we just put them in data library like that. So they're fully disclosed by us and they roll up NAICS wise. So all the detailed 6-digit level values will roll up. They've been controlled to their 5-digit level parent sectors, and the 5 digits have sectors their numbers have been controlled such that they roll up to the 4 digits and so on, all the way up to 2-digit. But they haven't at that stage, when we're creating those values, the US NIPA numbers aren't even out yet by the time we do our disclosing of CEW. And so we leave them in data library just like that for users who want to use that. But then when we continue with our data production processes, we take those CEW data and we have to bring them into the IMPLAN sectoring scheme. So we do some aggregation there. The CEW numbers are wage and salary income, so they don't have all the benefits and payroll taxes and things like that that we need for employee compensation. So then we convert those income numbers into employee compensation using a different data source. And we had mentioned that we estimate these numbers, missing numbers, and then we also adjust for under coverage, and we do all this stuff. And so there's a bunch of estimates in there that we have made. And so controlling to the US numbers is a way to adjust our estimates so that they match with a known value for the US. So it helps make our estimates even better because we're controlling everything to this known value. It also makes sure that we have geographic balancing. So when you're looking at IMPLAN values, you can add up all the state's numbers for any element, employment, employee compensation, output, by industry, any number in IMPLAN, and it's gonna, if you summed up all the state values, they're gonna equal the US value. And likewise for counties, they're gonna sum up and equal their state value and so on. And then in IMPLAN, when you're looking at the US values, you can compare most of those values to a number that you can get from the BEA's website and their NIPA tables. And so we match what the BEA is saying, at least in whichever release of the BEA tables that were available when we use the data. Of course, the BEA does go back and revises some of their numbers. And so, and that's where Michael was mentioning in terms of our time series that we redo every 5 years, we grab those revised numbers that weren't available when we first estimated. So I don't know if I've really fully answered the question, but it's just important we control those things to get better, to make our initial estimates even better, and then also to make sure that everything is balanced across the whole US. And so all our geographic levels all make sense. We're internally consistent in that manner.
All right, thanks for that response there, Jenny. And I also see a couple of questions here about data library. The first of which says, my dashboard doesn't have the data library option. If you do not currently have access to data library, I would reach out to our customer success team and have them explain the options to you for getting that added to your account. Again, that email address is support@implan.com, and one of our CSMs would be happy to get you assisted. Another question is, if you don't have a subscription to the data library, can you still get the 2022 list of deflators? Yes, we are currently still updating the support site for all of the associated documentation with the new 2022 annual data, but that should be available on our support site shortly. Okay. Let's see here, scrolling up. So I see one here from Benjamin. Jenny, I'm not sure if you would like to take this one. Why are the GDP growth rates, I'm presuming the ones that you presented earlier in the slides, why are those GDP growth rates greater than what I may see reported on the news?
Well, good question. It might be related to the factor that I mentioned previously about revised numbers. So the BEA will go back and revise GDP several times. I think they do a total of 4 estimates, I believe, 3 for sure. And at the time that we're making IMPLAN data, we're usually using their first estimate. So it may be due to that, but I'd have to know more about what source you're looking at to be able to tell for sure. But you can certainly email us with that question and we can dive in deeper to that.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
that is what happens sometimes.
Yeah, so again, I would just echo that if you're seeing some discrepancies in the values that we reported as opposed to another source, Benjamin, please feel free to email us and we would be happy to take another look at that. Okay, so we have a comment here, not a question, from one of our friends at Americans for the Arts. They are really encouraged to see that the four commodities that saw demand, three of the four largest commodities that saw increase in demand were related to the arts and culture. Yes, certainly. Um,
Uh,
and
I can grab one, Michael, unless you were going to make more comments about that one.
no, absolutely. I just wanted to echo that comment from Ben there.
Thank you for that. Super helpful. I have a question about what is exactly is proprietor employment. Just as note to begin with, we do have a glossary of terms on our support site that's really helpful, and it has the official definitions of these things and often has the link to the BEA website or some other website where something like that is defined. So IMPLAN doesn't define this ourselves, but it does get confusing sometimes because the proprietor themselves, so a sole proprietor or a partnership, is what's included in proprietor employment. And employment is used kind of loosely here. It really is just the proprietor. And any employees that work for that proprietor, they're actually going to be included as wage and salary employment in our CEW data. So if you're filling out a W-2, you are a wage and salary employee and not a proprietor. A proprietor would not fill out a W-2. So the employees that work for a proprietor are wage and salary employees. The proprietor themselves is what is called the proprietor, if that's helpful. But you can go on our website or on BEA's to get maybe a fuller, more official definition, but that's basically what it is.
Okay, so we have another one that just rolled in here. Could you elaborate the electricity generation employment with solar electricity generation by regions? Yes, we won't do that here live, but of course you do have the ability, especially within data library, to look at how this employment within this particular sector has changed on a regional basis. Of course, the values that I was quoting and looking at within data library were at a national level for those changes. So there was not any more granular regions that I applied, but you could of course do that. And if that's something you're interested in, we'd be happy to help walk you through that. Okay,
Um,
couple more minutes here.
I have one here. When looking at industry growth rates, is there a way in IMPLAN to distinguish between growth driven by changes in utilization versus changes in unit prices? And that's a really great question. The output numbers in IMPLAN will reflect price changes as well as changes in physical production. And the best suggestion I have off the top of my head is to use the deflators that we do have. We have specific from the BLS and BEA combined. We combine deflators from both of those sources. We have industry specific deflators. So that will help you get a sense of how much of it is due to price changes versus physical production.
Okay, so last one
Go ahead.
we'll take here again, this a follow-up question on the solar electricity generation sector. How about compensation level with other electricity generations between solar and other electricity generation sectors? Again, absolutely, that is something that, especially within data library or within region details, you would be able to compare across regions or particular industries. Again, you could either look at the CEW data for those wage and salary employees in data library, or you could also pull those from region details and include total employment and proprietors as well. And with that, I
Great
know we have,
question. Great point.
yeah. Thank you so much for these fantastic questions. I know we had a few of them that we were not able to get to live. There's a couple of pretty in-depth questions here that we may have to do a little bit of legwork behind the scenes to get a specific answer for. But with that, we are at the top of the hour, and I thank you all for joining us. Again, if we did not get a chance to answer your question here during our time, we will personally follow up with you via email. So Jenny, thank you so much for your time here today.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you all for being here.
All right, everybody have a great rest of your week, and we will see you soon.